Russia unleashed one of its most devastating attacks against Ukraine's electric sector. An aerial assault, it said, was retaliation for recent strikes inside Rafah. Today is Friday, March 23rd, 2024, and this is the Dunkley Report. Russia unleashed one of its most devastating attacks against Ukraine's electric sector. An aerial assault, it said, was retaliation for recent strikes inside Russia. It could signal an escalation of the war just days after President Vladimir Putin cemented his grip on power in a preordained election. Many Ukrainians were plunged into darkness across several cities on Friday. At least 5 people were killed, and damage to the country's largest hydroelectric plant briefly cut off power to a nuclear plant that has been a safety risk throughout the war. Ukrainian officials said it was the most brutal attack against its energy infrastructure since the full-scale war began in early 2022. Russia unleashed one of its most devastating attacks against Ukraine's electric sector. An aerial assault, it said, was retaliation for recent strikes inside Russia. It could signal an escalation of the war just days after President Vladimir Putin cemented his grip on power in a preordained election. Many Ukrainians were plunged into darkness across several cities on Friday. At least 5 people were killed, and damage to the country's largest hydroelectric plant briefly cut off power to a nuclear plant that has been a safety risk throughout the war. Ukrainian officials said it was the most brutal attack against its energy infrastructure since the full-scale war began in early 2022. Norseschi. Russian officials say more than 60 people have been killed and over 100 injured by assailants who burst into a concert hall and sprayed the crowd with gunfire. Friday's attack came just days after President Vladimir Putin cemented his grip on power in a highly orchestrated electoral landslide. The Islamic State group claimed responsibility for the attack in a statement posted on affiliated channels on social media. A U.S. intelligence official told the Associated Press that U.S. intelligence agencies had learned the group's branch in Afghanistan was planning an attack in Moscow and shared the information with Russian officials. The attack was the deadliest in Russia in years and came as the country's war in Ukraine dragged into a 3rd year. Holi is the Hindu festival of colors, which is celebrated to mark the start of spring in India, Nepal, and the diaspora. The festival typically falls in March. Celebrants rejoice by throwing colored powders at one another on the street. Festivities also involve special holiday foods, music, and dancing. Holi is seen as a time to welcome the good and let go of the negative. The festival exalts love and signifies a time of rebirth and rejuvenation. In many parts of India, bonfires are lit on the eve of Holi to symbolize the victory of good over evil. A cluster of Bollywood films based on polarizing issues that promote Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his government's Hindu nationalist agenda are coming out. It's just weeks until a national vote that will determine the political direction of the country. Some of these films have been accused of stoking Hindu nationalism at a time when India has seen its religious rifts re-emerge. Under Modi's rule, many filmmakers have embraced inflammatory plots and themes. Various films have been made on bygone Hindu kings extolling their bravery, with Muslim rulers as villains. Boisterous and action-filled movies about the Indian Army have become box office successes. And political dramas and biopics that eulogize Hindu nationalists and leaders from Modi's party are the norm. UN officials say more than 33,000 people have fled Haiti's capital in a span of nearly 2 weeks as gangs continue to pillage homes and attack state institutions. A new report from the UN's International Organization for Migration found that the majority have traveled to Haiti's southern region. It is generally peaceful compared with Port-au-Prince, which has an estimated population of 3 million and remains largely paralyzed by gang violence. Scores of people have been killed and some 17,000 people overall left homeless since the gang attacks began on February 29th, with gunmen targeting police stations and the main international airport that remains closed. Supporters of an anti-corruption crusader and one of India's most consequential politicians of the past decade are protesting against his arrest. Opposition parties say the arrest of Arvind Kejriwal late Thursday is part of a crackdown by Prime Minister Narendra. Modi's government before national elections start next month. Kejriwal, who is New Delhi's top elected official, was arrested by the Enforcement Directorate, which is controlled by Modi's government. The agency accused his party and ministers of accepting $12 million in bribes from liquor contractors. Kejriwal's political party says the allegations are fabricated. Modi's party denies using law enforcement agencies to target the opposition and says the agencies act independently. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has met with Israeli leaders in Tel Aviv on the final stop in his 6th urgent trip to the region since the start of the war. Blinken says he will share alternatives to Israel's planned ground assault into the southern Gaza town of Rafah during talks with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his war cabinet. However, after the meeting, Netanyahu said Israel would do it alone, if necessary. More than 1 million people have crowded into Rafah. They flee, fighting across the besieged territory. And at the UN Security Council, Russia and China vetoed a U.S.-sponsored resolution that called for, but not demanding, a ceasefire. The two dissenting nations called the measure ambiguous. Vietnam's president has resigned as the ruling Communist Party in the latest episode of a Blazing Furnace anti-corruption campaign. Vo Van Thuong was the second to resign from the post in just over a year. The presidency is largely a ceremonial role. The most powerful job is held by Communist Party General Secretary Nguyen Phu Trong. But a series of dismissals of top leaders has raised concerns about stability, as Vietnam's fast-growing economy plays an increasingly important role in world supply chains. Analysts say the turnover in leadership also stems from rivalries within the ruling party. Australia is set to provide $3 billion to British industry to support the construction of nuclear-powered submarines and ensure its new fleet arrives on time. The announcement at an annual gathering Friday comes a day after the two countries signed a defense and security pact to better meet such challenges as China's increasing presence in the South, China Sea, and South Pacific. The 10-year deal will boost capacity at a Rolls-Royce factory in the United Kingdom to build the nuclear reactors that will propel the submarines being built by BAE Systems in Adelaide, Australia. Today's news has been reported by the Associated Press. This has been the World News for Friday, March 23rd, 2024. Thanks again for joining us at The Dunkley Report.